Today we learn about the amazing integrity and character of the man David. Today's day 111. We're reading from 2 Samuel, the first 4 chapters. Now here we discover some inside information about how Saul and his sons were killed on the day of battle with a twist. And I want you to grab a hold of this. A young man approaches David. He has torn clothes and he has dust in his hair. It's almost presented as if it was manufactured. This happened to make it look like something that maybe didn't happen. He falls on the ground before David, and he's the first one to share the information of the details of the battle. Now, this is always a very important step, because the first one normally that gets to a supposed upcoming king and gives information or details is deeply rewarded. So he falls on the ground and he crafts a story. He says, I by chance found Saul and he was leaning on his sword. The enemy is crowding in quickly, and Saul looks behind as this young man's story and his account goes. It says that King Saul looked behind him and he asked, "Who are you?" And then he shares, "I'm an Amalekite," and so forth. And it's almost like a conversation going on. Now think about this. You've got this, the enemy troops are coming in behind. Saul, if indeed this were true, is enormous pain. He'd already been suffering and was mortally wounded, but and he's suffering deeply. And so he says, the young man says, "I stood over King Saul and I killed him because I was sure he couldn't survive." And then he said, "I took his crown and his bracelet," and that part may be the only true part of this story. And he says, "I brought it to you." Now this young man, what do you suppose was this man's intent? Now, something interesting about this story is that this was an Amalekite that took Saul's crown and bracelet, takes it to David. One of the interesting aspects of this, it was the Amalekite army, remember the king that he refused to kill, and he disobeyed God and Samuel, and didn't completely do what God had said. And so it's interesting that his demise is a result of an Amalekite coming and taking his crown away. Now, David's response to this was that he weeps and he mourns and he tears his clothes and he fasts till evening. And of course, the suspense is building, but then he says something that surprises everyone. He looks at the young man and he says, "How is it that you were not afraid to put forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" So he takes his story and then he almost throws it in his face, because we know the earlier account said that Saul asked his armor bearer to kill him, but he wouldn't, and then Saul fell on his sword. Now, the fact is, there's no doubt that this surprised the man. He really anticipated he's going to be rewarded greatly, and this shows, but again, the amazing character of David. David, any normal person would have said, "Listen, this king was wicked, evil. God has given him into our hands," and he could have rewarded the man for what he did. But not David. He said, "How could you touch God's anointed?" Now, another thing that really stands out in this account, these 4 chapters, is the relationship between David and Jonathan. Now, Jonathan has died, and 3 times, remember, Jonathan and David made a covenant with each other in their friendship and their loyalty to one another. This relationship is so deep and signals a secret key, an indication of David's enormous success, why he was such an unusual person. And it is also for us a suggestion of why it's so important for you and I to have a Jonathan in our lives. He says this, in hearing upon the news of Jonathan's death, "I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You've been very pleasant to me. Your love to me, was wonderful, surpassing the love of women." Now, this was not some inappropriate relationship, but this is a deep bond of loyalty, accountability, inspiration, friendship. This is what propelled David forward when he was in his deepest, darkest days. This was the link between this life and God. He was there pointing David to God. And I think that this is such a powerful for all of us to see, is the fact that this bonding relationship God sent to him was what helped deepen David, steady David, and it demonstrates how God uses Jonathan could have. And we say, why did they make this covenant 3 times? Well, the fact is Jonathan was David's son, and he probably had a right to eventual reign and rule on the throne. But it was a demonstration to David that Jonathan said, I'm loyal to you. And this friendship was so deep and so rich. It's interesting that David's moral failure occurred only after Jonathan's death. For after Jonathan dies, as far as we know, David never again found a replacement. And so there was this empty gap in his life where he didn't have that relationship, someone to help hold him up. And so when we look at all this, we realize how important it is for each and every one of us to have someone in our life that challenges us, stirs us, fans the flame. That would be the question for each and every one. Who is your Jonathan?